The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. Driven by machine learning, Edgewise automatically builds policies that protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network. They provide measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and verifying software identity before it communicates to stop application compromises and data breaches. To see how to eliminate your network attack surface, visit securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then Gravwell is the solution for you. Gravwell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. Gravwell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs. Their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Everyone's still here, and I have a quick announcement. We're going to be at Black Hat and DEF CON, specifically Black Hat. We've rented a suite to do a whole bunch of recordings. We've opened up more slots. We still have some availability on the Paul Security Weekly episode we're recording at Black Hat. If you're interested, go to securityweekly.com/booking to book your request today. Get in on that, because it's going to be awesome.
You should.
You should. Here with us is Bryson Bort. He's the founder and CEO for SCYTHE. Bryson, welcome.
Hey, good to see you again, Paul.
Nice to have you back on the show, Bryson.
Feels like home.
That's right. That's right. Talking about attack simulation, and specifically, you opted for all three. I was like, we should talk about this stuff. And Bryson's like, yes, all of it. I'm like, okay, let's go. Which is cool. The first one I wanted to talk about was purple teaming. And I know we've kind of talked about purple teaming in the past. We have described some exercises, but I really wanted to back up and kind of get your take, because I believe your solution really helps maximize the effectiveness of a purple team. But let's back up. What is a purple team? Why is it important? And let's start there.
Okay, so first of all, you need the right visual aid. So we have our purple unicorn here to demonstrate that. And for those of you at home who are really enjoying Paul Asadorian's shirt,
I get lots of compliments on this shirt, by the way, Bryson. I was at Ace Hardware today, and like as I was walking out, the dude at the register was like, "I love your shirt." So there you go. Has mass appeal.
Yeah, it does. And which is why we partnered with Johnny Long over at Hackers for Charity. And so all the donations, all the proceeds go to them for anybody who wants to get a shirt.
Sweet.
But back to Purple Team. I think, first of all, it's worth noting Purple Team is not some separate organization. This isn't like we're going to suddenly have a Purple Team lead and we're going to be adding a whole bunch more security folks to do just that. I think the best summary definition I've ever seen is from Daniel Miessler, and he said it's where 1 + 1 is 3. And it's blue team and red team coming together in an orchestrated fashion where they actually work together. In some ways, purple teaming is overcoming the weaknesses that we've seen of cooperation and communication between red team and blue team. And as we all know, those have been many and manifold over the years for lots of different reasons. When at the end of the day, both teams are responsible for how do we protect the enterprise, and what's the easiest way to have a combined visibility on what both those pieces are doing, what's the easiest way for both of those elements to collaborate, and what's the easiest way for us to have orchestration for those components coming together. The way we do it in our platform is that the red team engagements are automatically integrated into the SOC SIM, so that the blue team can immediately deconflict anything that they see and understand what's happening. On the back end of that, the red team can easily share that malware and those playbooks that they used because the platform automatically, since it's programmatically generated for each campaign, is unique. You're not compromising anything by giving the blue team the ability to bring that into the DevOps process, which I think is a really unique purple team future, where your engineers and your blue teams are able to construct configurations, detections, and the tools themselves with being able to test it with red team capabilities before it even gets to release.
It's interesting, Bryson, as you describe it. I wrote some unit test code for my application. And I didn't realize like how formal that was. So there's libraries to do that and everything. And I kind of look at a purple team as almost like a unit test, right? Mm-hmm. Because you got the attackers and defenders coming together, and you're orchestrating those tests. And I like your vision of moving them into DevOps so that it's just a continual process of testing all of your defenses.
Yep, absolutely.
So what are the objectives like in a purple team exercise, and how should you construct them? Like, obviously you probably don't want to boil the ocean, and you don't want to be maybe too narrowly focused. What's your advice on that front?
Very simply, I would start with the communication and cooperation. Having the blue teams and the red teams sit down beforehand and have the blue teams talking through if they're going to be doing a discrete red team engagement, what the blue team wants tested and why they want it tested and what they've already done based on threats they've seen, and sharing that threat intelligence. And then, so the red team is validating specific things that are of value to them. It's tied back into the real world. I get very frustrated when I see pen testing and red teaming that's more artificial than it is real, because I think there's limited value in that, and I think that's a lot of what we see. And so starting at that beginning point, making sure that the communication is naturally there, at a minimum, if you just know who to pick up the phone to talk to during an engagement. And then finally having a joint after action review where both sides talk about the results and the process for improvement.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. I really like that process because in those initial meetings, and I think pen testers have these meetings today, but it's not a true purple team all the time. But in there, much like my code, right, and my network and security designs, I'm like, yeah, like that area over there, I know I have to spend some time there. Like, we're not gonna test that portion. Like, there's other stuff. I've spent some time, and this represents what we believe to be our good defense, and we put some design effort into it and implemented some stuff. Let's test that, and then like while that's happening, I know that I've got this other project I got to go address. If it's code, that really ugly area of code that I haven't touched in a long time, or that really ugly area of the network or applications or systems that I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get to that. And that kind of comes next up in the queue, right? Is that a pretty valid approach?
It's trying to keep that from happening. So it's trying to bring all those pieces together. So like we were talking earlier about try catches or try exceptions or whichever language you choose, and how stuff gets neglected because it's like, well, I'm working on this and forget all that. Yeah. So I think, to me, and Bryson can correct me, but I mean, that purple teaming was to bring all that together, to make sure you weren't leaving things out of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would add, and it's not a well-known fact, but it is a good transition to our next topic about MITRE ATT&CK, is actually, while there are about 200 different objects in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, one of those is specifically how bad Paul's code is, and that it is a continual surface area of risk for compromise in organizations all over the world.
It is, to my defense, I inherited the code from 3 different developers, but that's not saying I don't.
Every developer ever says that,
right?
Of course, but only Paul has an actual column on the MITRE framework that says Paul's code. It's like we actually.
No, he doesn't get a whole column. He just gets a box.
Oh, he's got a box.
I mean, it's well deserved. I'm not saying I don't.
Box. I mean, come on.
I write really crappy code. I'm not.
The Paul's box lights up.
I'm not trying to mask that.
Yeah, your automated MITRE tool just goes like, you're screwed. You're screwed. You're screwed.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I think there was 244 last count, because I asked someone who actually counted in the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
Yeah, it's a big.
But now we can't possibly, Bryson, like keep all those in our head or go through 244 different test and expect to be able to deal with that, right? We've got to kind of meal that out somewhat. Do you have recommendations on how, all right, I'm reviewing MITRE ATT&CK, I got 244 things I can test for, like where do I begin?
Yeah, well, I mean, you didn't mean that to be a softball, but that's actually one of the differentiators I think our platform brings to the table is the ability to do MITRE ATT&CK across the enterprise in an offensive way with the snap of your fingers. And that's actually what converted John Strand over to our side to become a customer, was the ability to do that. But, shilling aside, I always like to start with the basics. And the basics are the fact that what do attackers do most and what's most common to your environment? And the first thing that I think we see a lot of, and red teams do this a lot as well, is PowerShell. And you don't want to look at all of the pieces. Actually, I'm going to step back. So besides not being able to look at all the pieces on average easily, the other thing is don't get too wrapped up in the specific techniques. Because you really want to be behaviorally focused when you're looking at your enterprise. I'll give an example. We had a client the other day, and we were doing an on-site trial with the SCYTHE platform, and their eyes bugged out of their head when the payload dropped, wasn't caught, and then started doing things, and they were just sort of like, we need to get this payload over to the blue team immediately to build a detection for it. And it's like, that defeats the point. All you've done is try to capture the handful of techniques that were demonstrated for that specific synthetic malware. You're not actually solving the problem. And so focusing on more on the behaviors gets you out of that mindset. So that being said, I think PowerShell is also a great example of that. So PowerShell is commonly used because it's great for an attacker when I show up and you've already given me an attack toolkit. I don't have to bring my own tools to the game. I'm just going to use yours. But the defense for PowerShell is actually fairly simple, because what you want to be doing is, since they have to log into your centralized instance to invoke it, auditing unauthorized PowerShell use in the environment is going to help you identify that's happening. And so that's an easy way to, again, defeat the technique. But you still want to be looking at what happens if they bring their own similar tools to the game, and your ability to detect those kinds of behaviors on hosts and at the network level.
Yeah, it's interesting. I when you describe it, I kind of think of PowerShell as like Bash on Linux, except you can't, I guess you could remove Bash on Linux, right? But people still need to use the shell, right? Essentially.
Like some shell, yeah.
But better, and in using that as an example, better to identify malicious behaviors with PowerShell or Bash or whatever the language is, and try to defend against that than the specific invocation of a language and specific malicious things that could be implemented in that language or framework, right?
Yep. And then following that, since I personally believe that access is overall a losing game. You're going to work to build your walls. They're going to get breached. It's going to happen over and over again, and that's not solvable. And the most critical, if it's not destructive, the most critical element to malware is the ability for it to be command and controlled, and for the ability for it to exfiltrate the data that the attacker's going after. And so that ties to two parts of the MITRE ATT&CK, which are what they call standard application layer protocol, and then something like remote file copy. Now, what standard application layer protocol is, which is just a fancy way of saying the basic protocols, HTTP, DNS, SMTP, right? We're talking mail, we're talking the ability to resolve web pages, we're talking the ability to send encrypted web traffic.
Oh yeah, that's T1028. I don't know. It was.
Actually, I think it's T1071, Paul.
Is it 1171? Yeah.
Who cares?
There's a number there. Well, I covered it.
It has a number. It's what it is. It's what it is. These are the basic protocols that are happening in your environment, because if I'm an attacker, I'm not bringing something special to the game. I'm blending in with the traffic that you've got.
Yep.
I'm going to put on the sheep's clothing.
So it's interesting, Bryson. I gave in one of my webcast presentations, I took all of the attacks against the Empire in Rogue One, and I tried to map them back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
Oh God!
And now, if you haven't seen the movie Rogue One, now's the time to fast forward.
But if you stop, pause for a minute, go watch Rogue One, and then come back.
Come back.
Take notes.
So in Rogue One, Galen Erso is the designer of the Death Star.
Yes.
But in the movie, Galen sends communications to the rebels that, hey, I've built a back door inside of the Death Star, and you just need to get the plans, and it'll be pretty obvious that the thermal exhaust port is the way to go, right? That communication, right, is some kind of backdoor, communication channel. And so whether you're defending against a malicious insider like Galen, which is kind of a backwards way to think about he was a good guy working for the bad guy, so he was a
double agent,
a malicious insider. But anyway, but that maps back to the MITRE attack framework, right? In the way we look at, if, like Bryson's saying, if a flip the tables, right, bad person gets into my network, they have to exfiltrate data. And had the Empire paid attention to the MITRE attack framework and said, hey, we should be looking for these rogue communications, I guess you could say, then they would have seen that communication. In fact, there's a great scene where, now I forget the character's name, one of the generals in the Imperial Army says, I want to see all of the communications that Galen Erso ever did and want to review it for what's bad. It's too late, dude. Like, you should have been looking for that behavior while it happened, right? And I think that's kind of what to put that in a Star Wars context, what we're talking about.
And if it was really the Empire, they would have delivered like a giant pallet full of green bar. You know, it was like if it was a real Empire.
I'm going to disagree with you, Paul, and only from the perspective at, when I was working at NSA and we used to build cryptographic systems. So we're talking about more of a specific use case, as it were. Our going in position for trying to build a secure crypto system was always the assumption that the adversary, whoever that might be, knew everything that there was to know about whatever it was we were building. They had the instruction manual, they had a physical copy of one, they'd reverse engineered it, whatever. And the challenge was still to make sure that it encrypted. And of course, the key is the key. So I don't know if that, to be fair, I don't know if that applies in this instance. But
well, it does, and it speaks to the Empire's shortcomings of believing they had built something that was secure, right? To them, it almost didn't matter. If you remember the scene in A New Hope, where we're the supreme power in the galaxy, right? And that you can't, at NSA, Jeff, you didn't make that assumption, right? You assumed that we had leaked the plans,
right?
And we had to design a more resilient system, knowing that someone might have the plans.
Now, I've had a few drinks, but does that make Jeff Jar Jar Binks? I'm not exactly sure in this analogy.
So.
I'm kind of confused, but
I used to think so.
I don't have my Star Wars notebook
He
handy here.
self-proposes he's Jar Jar Binks. Yes.
Doug, I know. Well, I don't know where you live, but I know where you work.
Hey, Lucas says it's all about Jar Jar. He's quoted as saying that. And if you think about that, I'll leave that as an exercise to the audience. It's kind of true.
I'm sorry, Jeff. I couldn't resist. But
well, my point ultimately was, I don't think that the issue was, and you're framing it a little bit different now. I don't think the issue was that the Empire, let communications leak out. The issue was that there was this vulnerability or backdoor built into the system. However, and it's funny because I've actually been on a Twitter chat this afternoon, and even during the episode, where somebody brought up the Death Star analogy and the whole exhaust port thing. And, we're using that to try to frame an understanding of risk and, what is the vulnerability? What is the threat? What is the countermeasure? And my question to you, Paul, is, let's say that the Empire should have either done away with the exhaust port, or maybe put a mesh screen on front of it, done something to mitigate the vulnerability. In assessing the risk posed by that vulnerability being there, should the Empire have taken into account that ultimately there would be somebody that had the Force on their side helping them, or should that, was it enough for them to say, well, the Rebel forces, there's no way they're ever going to be able to shoot a photon torpedo under this thing, so we're, because they had countermeasures in place, they had all sorts of, I haven't seen the movie in a while, but, all sorts of cannons and guns firing things on this Death Star itself. They had all the TIE fighters as defenses. and what was the likelihood that a member of the rebel force using the force could actually pull off the shot of a lifetime.
The technology in the Death Star is insignificant compared to the power of the Force.
You can't beat the supernatural.
If you disagree, you might get force choked.
You can't beat what the script says.
That's right.
There you go.
That's right.
If Lucas says it, it's going to happen.
Bryson,
remember, two movies later, they added a force field around the new Death Star that had to be thwarted from the planet.
Yeah,
so they
which
upped their
was
defense.
like you couldn't have put that off switch on the Death Star itself, but yeah, whatever.
getting back on track off of Star Wars.
Bryce is like, what the hell?
we went down a little bit of a tangent, reeling it back in. If you're defending Microsoft Active Directory, Bryson, we've established that identifying behaviors, right, is a thing which led us down the whole path to the dark
rabbit
side.
hole of the
whole path to the dark side. But what's your assessment, having developed and architected this tool? How should people approach Active Directory security? What should the testing process be, and how should they prioritize their defenses?
That's a really broad question.
And you've got to put the whole thing in an analogy from Star Wars.
Are there?
Well, let me break it down for you with a simple
Active
question.
Directory is like the 1970s file disk retrieval system that was on that storage planet where the plans were actually kept that the rebels had to break into.
There you go.
That's a great analogy, Bryson.
Hell, yes.
It makes sense. It does.
So you have to make sure that your force field is only granting access to that to the officers that are supposed to have access, which are sysadmins.
Right.
So the other part of that makes no sense to me is, or it's a better demonstration of the fact that we like change technologies every generation and we keep like going backwards and then we go forwards and go backwards and go forwards. So apparently it's going to be the cloud in the future is going to be an isolated planet-sized storage system.
For which I can impersonate credentials to gain access to, which happens in the movie. Is that the primary struggle when customers and potential customers are running your attack simulation platform? Does a lot of it come down to projects they have to execute to secure Active Directory?
So I mean, not necessarily. Active Directory is certainly very popular in red team engagements because you owned AD and it's like drop mic, I win, I got everything. But I don't think that's necessarily realistic to the real world. And if you look at the way an advanced persistent threat is going to be moving through your environment, they're going to, first thing is they don't land knowing where they are.
Right.
They have a general idea of, all right, I got to call back. Like, I think that's that organization that we've been targeting for 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, whatever it is. But where am I? Where exactly did I land? And am I safe? Okay, I'm safe. Now I'm going to call back home and I'm going to pull down additional capabilities and communications to build up my local payload. And then I'm going to start looking around. And I'm going to figure out what's of interest around me and how do I get there. And I'm going to start laterally moving through to do that. And the reason advanced persistent threat's going to use that approach as opposed to a more common Active Directory attack is because Active Directory, it's visible in the system. There's fingerprints, and those can be fingerprints that can be hard to hide. Whereas my ability to continue to evade you at the host level where you never see me, because I defeat all your EDR, and then to continue to blend in internally with internal traffic is going to ensure that I'm able to walk my way and establish my proxies and way out for exfiltration. So that's, I think, the difference between a real world and a red team approach.
So real world attackers don't go in and try and map the entire Active Directory. Essentially what you're saying is it's too noisy. They're going to resort to what I would imagine to be things like packet sniffing, right, to get a lay of the land, and things that are more stealthy and next to impossible to detect.
Well, just think about it from passive collection. Ethernet is promiscuous.
Yeah.
So just by sitting there on
traffic, you'd get tons from broadcast traffic.
Yeah, so I can sit there quietly, just sniff off of Ethernet and map out the network, and then decide to make my move when I want to.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I mean, you could monitor NetStat and Ethernet broadcast traffic and gain a lot of information just from that.
Probably, monitor the whole network.
And if you're not detecting the initial, the infection in the back door and the C2 channel, then Bryson, you're right. That's what an attacker is going to do, a smart attacker.
And that highlights, again, why it's so important to do for two pieces. One, the best friend of defense is heterogeneity. And then tied to that is what you're able to do with segmentation, with being able to create choke points. Because anytime something changes or anytime I have to go through a new gate as an attacker, I have to stop and repeat that process again. And every time I repeat that process is an opportunity for me to make a mistake.
Yep. Yeah, I've been pondering lately how much an attacker can emulate regular behaviors in the network, whether that's an application, whether that's a system service, a system process, or an actual user, before they make a mistake that the blue team can detect.
You could almost model that.
Right.
I mean, and you could almost model that with statistics and go, what's the likelihood? So it's like a Poisson distribution of what's the likelihood you make a mistake.
Because the better defensive techniques that I've encountered, Bryson, really are able to tell you when something steps out of the norm like that. That a user or process or something is doing something slightly different. I mean, there is very subtle differences, but like you said, Bryson, the more choke points you put in, the more the attacker may have to step outside the bounds of what normal looks like, right? And that's what you want as a defender.
Exactly. And the one place an attacker can't change the laws of physics is when I'm on the wire.
Yeah.
I go to ones and zeros like everybody else. And going back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, where we're looking at those standard application layer protocols, which there's the external ones, then there's the internal ones, like SMB, RPC. And my ability to what's normal behavior on those protocols, and any anomaly is going to be your opportunity to identify something that no matter what you're seeing at the host level, there's proof that there's something going on there, because there's no way for them to hide there on the wire.
So it sounds like it's more important to do that behavioral detection more so than to go in and try and harden every single setting and condition in Active Directory, which is a huge undertaking.
Absolutely. That's what I advocate.
I mean, 1,000 years ago, I used to write scripts that looked at keystrokes. And I knew what keystrokes people typically typed on the mainframe. So, I mean, we could see every keyboard on the mainframe wire.
You had a machine learning algorithm back then, didn't you?
Yeah, right. It was called me. But I wrote scripts that looked for people to type things that were unusual. People type the same stuff over and over and over again. And when I saw somebody type something weird, they went on the shit list. And my shit list I generated every day, and I could look at my shit list and go, look at this guy right here. Who is this guy? And I would go look at that person and find out, this is some weird person. Why in the hell would they type this? And that was a person I started watching real heavy, because they were doing something that just started edging outside that nice, normal plan. And when I saw those people, almost invariably, they were people that were up to no good. I mean, literally. I mean, they would almost always be somebody who was going to try something. And I started logging the hell out of those people, because that was how I targeted logging. I mean, I went in and said, I'm going to watch that guy right there.
Reminds me of a Black Mirror episode, because I kind of, whether she can like look inside the brain of her child.
Oh yeah, the person can see the memories. Yeah,
I kind of feel like that when I'm looking at someone's like bash command history, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like we've gotten inside them, and I can like see their thought process and what they're thinking. But what you're saying is we need to extrapolate that out into.
I think you should. I mean, I think that's that kind of intelligent analysis that lets you exclude all the average and just focus on the exceptions. I mean, that's. Yeah,
the entire history of you.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
That's right.
So the way I phrase what you just said there is we're reducing the size of the haystack, because defense is looking for needles, and being able to attenuate detections and our processes to focusing on those kinds of anomalous behaviors allows us to reduce the size of the haystack that we're looking at and take all that noise off the table, which is just a waste of our time.
You're trying to find an infected needle and a stack of infected needles.
Wow. Is that like a heroin reference? Like, what are we doing here?
I'll be right back.
That's.
I'm wondering. You mentioned, finding a path back for C2 and access. How common is it for the path to the internet to be blocked or required authentication, or is that really unusual? for there to be any trouble getting back to where you need to. I know we've got plenty of defenses for inbound, but are those
not hard
there?
at all? That's barely an inconvenience.
Because there's so many ways to construct that C2 channel, right? I guess it comes down to behavior versus signature, right?
I'll give you a great example. How often do you inspect all the Google Suite traffic that's leaving your organization or Office 365?
That's in the Alexa Top 100, Bryson. So like that's automatically excluded from my analysis.
Yeah, we have there's so much control channels that use those protocols.
Right. Well, I've been working with a group that has outbound authentication, so you can't access the internet until you authenticate, and it doesn't do single sign-on. So you really have to, use something to get on there. Of course, while it's open, you could hop through as good as their traffic, but at least it's not 24/7 open.
Yeah, so I would have to. That's an example of pattern of life where you would have to use the channels that are available as the operator. The user is there at that moment, so you've got an 8 to 10 hour window every day during the work week.
Yeah, it's similar to when everyone started implementing proxies, and then every attack tool adopted the ability to use that same proxy and authenticate the proxies. Yeah. We're just riding on whatever top of authentication that we have.
And that's what we do.
It's still a lot of doing the attack simulation, figuring out which command and control channels you can detect and how you detect them. That's one of the more, I think, important parts of the test, right? Because like you said, you're not going to stop an attacker from getting in. You're not going to even be able to detect the best attackers via logs or other system behaviors. But everyone's got to send traffic over that wire, right?
Yep.
Is that kind of the starting? Is that a good starting point, I guess?
Yeah, it is. And so the lightning talk I gave at AttackCon last year, I came up with a different way to look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So instead of it being 244 boxes with all of these individual pieces, I break it into two axes: communications, capabilities. Capabilities are what I can fundamentally do on a host. Communications are all the ways that I can talk. And by segregating it that way, that makes it very easy for me to dial in on that kind of focus.
And I mean, suffice it to say, if you haven't run an attack simulation tool or looked at the C2 communications coming out of your network, the first thing you want to do is take away all the obvious ones, right? As the first step, right? So you're forcing the attacker to use something else, right?
Yep.
And to act outside that norm.
Yeah.
So the minute you take away those opportunities, they have to go outside that nice little standard box that you've put everybody else in. And when the minute they step outside there, you can say, oh, there, I got to watch that guy right there. That's the guy I'm looking for.
Then I would imagine it comes down to like using Google services in general as a C2 channel, is being able to differentiate between a legitimate user of any type of Google service like that and a malicious user. What do we have at our disposal as defenders, Bryson, to detect that?
I don't have the answer yet on that one.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
It works so well for us.
It does. It does. It does. I mean, having done threat hunting, a pen tester friend of mine was like, well, yeah, I'm just going to use a social media network or, a Google Drive, whatever you're using in your organization. That's my C2 channel, and good luck finding me, right?
Yep. That's why we also use Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, Twitter was actually his example. He was using, and if you allow Twitter in your, what are you going to do? Block? You could, I guess you could block Twitter, right?
Good luck with that.
But then you're just going to use some other social media. You're going to find whatever's allowed out.
Which, again, it's right. If you think about it that way, because, Twitter and Google are just whitelisted domains instantiated in HTTPS fundamentally, right? If we're looking at it, it's really just a protocol of HTTPS going to some place that you think is trusted. And so again, getting out of that technique, where can we start to establish the behaviors and looking at that with using those things versus just being like, all right, we need to be paying attention to all of these things.
I mean, you could look for traffic patterns, but that still gets difficult.
And it gets lost in the noise.
I mean,
it doesn't. But you can look for a signature and say, "Bang, there it is." But when you're talking, now you got a massive job load there to try to do analysis, especially with Twitter. Jeez.
It's great odds the attacker is going to be able to do. Even if you're looking at least frequently occurring, most frequently occurring, and data size and things like that.
Good luck.
It's still when you're using a trusted source.
That's
like
a big job.
Absolutely. Okay, now we're all scared.
Yeah, we're all scared. I'm leaving.
So, Bryson, product updates. Since you've last come on the show? Are there new features, payloads or things that you've built into the product?
So we integrate the Atomic Red Team framework by Red Canary.
Mm-hmm.
So you're able to just import those modules, and now they're weaponized in. We also use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to allow you to build up the payloads and the logic and TTPs into the payloads themselves, which I think is really cool. You get this picture of the whole framework, and you just click on it, and then it has multiple options. You click it, and it automatically integrates that to build out your custom payloads. We're about to release OS X, so we're going to be on Mac now. So we'll have all the 3 main desktop operating systems covered. And I think the thing that's most exciting is while lateral movement has always been a capability that's there, we're building out an entire wizard in the GUI that will allow you to build out all your lateral capabilities and automate those. So now you're going to be able to create this custom worm that's going to be able to really move through things automatically for you.
And that's great, because as we were talking, it's great to have a C2 channel that's super hard to detect. However, I can only do so much damage to the organization if it's difficult for me to laterally move, right? Or I have to get noisy to laterally move. So that's a great addition to the framework, Bryson. I like it.
Yeah.
And folks can sign up for a demo on the website, correct? It's still how
you can get a free trial.
Free trial, and that's all.
I will note that we only give free trials to enterprises because, as you continue to talk about, I think pretty much every episode, how everything I build is really scary. We do not want this to get into the wrong hands, so only enterprises are allowed to have access to our platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. securityweekly.com/SCYTHE will get you there. And you can get, provided you work for an enterprise and you're not an evil bad person, you can get a trial of the platform. I encourage you to do that and listen to this segment, I think, to really kind of guide you where you want to start.
Go check this out. I mean, this is such a nice product that you should really take a look at it. I mean, if this is something you're thinking about implementing, I really would like. I mean, I like it. I think it's just a cool thing.
I really do relate it to like unit testing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know you've drawn everything back to unit testing today.
That's what I've been doing.
I had a slice of pizza earlier, and you're like, that's like unit testing in a way.
Yeah. You weren't unit testing your pizza. You were consuming it. It's different.
It's almost like unit testing.
Well, Bryson, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
I'll see you in Vegas, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned.